Hello, it's Janice from Rue de Fleurs. Welcome back into the studio for another installment of Inspiration from the Garden. We are going to go outside and grab this little crocus to inspire our embroidery for our garden journal for the month of February. And I am going to be doing all of this from my chair in the living room with my little snuggle pup. Because I have a very on-brand February cold. So let's get stitching and doing our February entry in the garden journal. So I am just snuggled up here, and I'm going to take a minute and sort of look at my crocus and get set with a little sketch. You'll notice I start sketching on the wrong side. So I will eventually flip that over, but I'm just holding my little bulb here that I dug out of the yard, and then I rinsed it off and I put it in this tiny little bud vase that I have. And I'm just giving myself a little light sketch. Whenever I fix it, I do the exact same thing on the other side, so I didn't bother to refilm any of that. So just very lightly pencil sketching. Taking a minute to observe sort of the shape of the leaves, the way they frame the crocus, and the petals on the crocus, and the way the stem tapers down into the little bulb, and adding a few little roots off of the bottom just to be inspired. And try to capture it the best that I can. And I'm just going to hold it up and try to decide what colors I'm going to use here. I do end up going with a brighter green than the leaves just because I really liked it. It was kind of like this bright army green color. So I just decided to go with that, and I'm going to try to choose like a few yellows and a cream color that I think will look nice and stand out on my background. There's also purple at the base of my crocus, so I'm trying to find a good purple that will blend with the other colors. So I don't think everything has to be exactly spot on, and I think we talked about this in January as well, but I'm trying to find things that also will look good in my composition, not just exactly what's going to look right to match my flower. So I choose a softer purple, a little off-white, and some yellow. I'm choosing like a creamy color for the roots. I don't use that very bright green, but I do use that more like brownish green color, and then I have a brown for my bulb. And I'm just going to take a minute and flip through my Mystical Stitches book and kind of get inspired, but I don't end up using too many tricky stitches on this. Really, I stick to the stem stitch, like a satin stitch, and then I do use the ray stitch because a lot of it is filling in more dense areas. So here I've switched my design to the correct wedge now that I need, and I'm just using a very basic like satin fill stitch to get my bulb down, and I decided to speed it up pretty quickly because I had actually already filmed myself do it on the wrong side before I realized, and I had to pick all those stitches out, and I was kind of frustrated, but I'm just going ahead and filling in that whole area and trying to give it a little movement with the directionality of my stitches, and you can see that. And I kept the bottom and the top a little rough, just like the bulb was, to represent it. And then I have this very soft like buff color that I'm going to use to add a few roots at the bottom. I pick it into just 3 strands, and I cut that out so you don't have to watch that. But all I'm going to do for the roots is work with a stem stitch. So that's where you come up through the bottom, always, of course, and then you are going to put down your first stitch and then come up halfway and right to the side of it And here I'm just making sure to catch the tail with my little back stitch there. And I'm just going to come right up to the side of it and work my way down. So my needle is coming up to the side of my last stitch, but then going down in front of the stitch that I just did, so that you get like this very slightly angled look to your stitch, but it's still going relatively in a straight line. And I use the stem stitch for all of the little roots that I create. Even this one, I'm starting down at the bottom and I'm working my way back up. It doesn't matter which way you go, just try to keep your needle to the same side of your stitches, right? So you don't want to change from the left to the right. You want to keep it, if you've started on the right, you want to keep it on the right. If you started on the left, you want to keep coming up on the left, and so on. So I just do a few of these little roots, which I think is kind of a sweet and interesting detail, and not something I'm likely to capture every single month because I won't always be digging out bulbs from my garden. Don't be scandalized. I did replace the other bulbs, and I'll just move this one to a different location. And now I'll have a few more crocuses coming up next year. I do eventually get purple ones and yellow ones, but the white are always the first to come up. Then I'm just tucking my threads underneath, and I'll do this all the time. It just helps keep the back of your embroidery neat as well, so that when you're coming up on the front, you're not catching little tails and getting fuzzy tails coming up through to the front of your embroidery. Or also, if I need to change directions, then I'll take it underneath of a few stitches next to it, so that I don't have a lot of loose threads on the back of my embroidery. And if you find that you're getting twisted around things, or you're getting stuck while you're working, or you're having things come through the back, I would suggest maybe trying to tuck a few more of your threads. Oh, here I think the power just went out and came back on. We've been having a lot of power outages as well. Our power had been out for 24 hours before I had filmed this. And I haven't been feeling well, so it's a very February type situation around here. But you can see those delicate little roots are all finished, and now I'm switching to this green color. I just really felt like something bright, even though it's not necessarily very February to think of bright green, but it is a very bright thing whenever one or two flowers starts appearing in the garden. It's always the most exciting when those crocuses start popping up, or whatever it is that comes up first in your garden. I always feel very excited, like, oh my gosh, the end is in sight. So again, I'm just starting at the top of the bulb, and I'm just creating a very simple stem stitch again, and I'm just going to work my way up through each one of the 4 little leaves that come off of my bulb. Again, I'm just using the stem stitch, and I'm coming up on my line. I'm bringing my needle down, and then I am coming up right next to it, right to that right side, about halfway through that stitch, and going down to my next spot. And I'm just going to run back down through and start back at the top of the bulb to begin my next little leaf blade. And my leaves were variegated on my bulb, and you could add an extra line if you wanted to and make these like a double line, but I just decided to go with this one simple green and not overcomplicate the stitching any more than I needed to. It's not photorealistic. It is made with thread, so there's allowed to be, a little poetic license, I think. And so I'm just filling in everything. Sometimes I work from the top down, sometimes I work from the bottom up. I just go with what feels like it will make the most sense to fill everything in. A couple of leaves I came up on the right, and then a couple of leaves I came up on the left. And I think it works either way as long as you choose one or the other for that length of stitching. You can't flip back and forth during the actual length itself, or you're going to get a whole different look, not a stem stitch. And there it is, all complete up to that. Both of those were created with a stem stitch, and then my bulb with a satin stitch. And now we just need to fill in the center of our crocus. So I am going to begin with the purple because my stem looked like it was darker and mostly purple all the way down to where it sort of lined up with the leaves. So I am filling in, again, I believe I'm doing a stem stitch just to get up to the top. And then when I'm up here at the base of my crocus where my leaves start to branch out, I am actually going to do a ray stitch. So that is where you come up in one spot and then you make a stitch. The next stitch you sort of come up from that same base point and angle ever so slightly to one side or the other, creating a spray that sort of comes out from a central point. So I do several stitches like that towards the base of each of my front-facing petals. And that is how it appeared in my crocus, that there was a small spray of purple that came off of the bottom of the stem and went up into each one of the petal areas. So I tried to capture that again with my stitching. Now I am moving on to the darker yellow that was also at the base next to my purple. And again, I'm using that satin stitch, kind of ray stitch, to fill in at the bottom. And I'm just starting at the top of each one of those purple lines that I created, and then spraying out from that. So slightly angling, but trying to have it fill in. So a combination of a ray stitch and a satin stitch. I'm leaving some gaps in between because I want my cream petal color to then come down and sort of bleed into the yellow, so it blends a lot. And I'm also trying to blend a little bit of the yellow into the purple because there's not really a harsh line on the crocus itself. What I do think I wish I had done is leave a little bit of space in between each petal to delineate them a little bit better, because it does sort of all just look like one mass until you get up toward the top of the petals. So I think next time I would think about maybe artificially leaving a little bit more space, even though obviously like my petals in my actual bulb overlap. I don't think it looks as well in the embroidery as I would like it to. And then these little rays that you see me making here with the yellow are going to be the shadow at the base of the two back petals. So that's what I'm creating here. And then we're on to the cream. And we're gonna fill in the rest of our petals. And I think I speed through this pretty quickly because it is just a repetition of what I did before, but you can see how quickly it goes. It really only took me a day and then a little part of the morning, a little afternoon stitching, and then part of the morning to finish this entire embroidery. So maybe like 2.5-ish hours. And that is getting up and stopping to film a bunch and just sip on my coffee and clean out my nose, unfortunately. Okay, now I have switched to my smaller hand needle, but there's a close-up of what I've done so far. So again, it's mostly ray stitch, satin stitch, and stem stitch. And I've switched to my itty-bitty little hand needle and just 2 strands of this bright orange so that I can make the stamen for my little crocus there. You can see that they are like a single line with a teeny weeny little ball on top. So that is basically what I'm doing. I've come up from the back. I am making 1 little line with my very thin thread and thin needle, and then I am doing the teeniest little French knots at the top of those. So I'm twisting 3 times around my needle and then gently pulling it down just above where I've come up. So I'm coming up from the back just to go over it, and I am layering a little bit on top of my stitching on the underside because I felt like it made it look a little bit more three-dimensional to have those orange lines actually come in front of some of my behind stitching. So I'm adding a couple of small lines there, and then I'm coming up from the back, I'm going down with a singular stitch, and then I am coming up from the back right at the top of that stitch. I'm wrapping 3 times around my needle, and then I am going in right next to where I had just come up to make my little French knot and create those layers of the little stamen there. So now we are all done with our crocus. I think it looks darling, and Nibbles had the best day hanging out with Mom on the recliner, just stitching and being quiet. And I'm just checking that I think I did a pretty good job, that I captured my crocus pretty well. I could have had a little bit of yellow down there at the base, but you know what? It doesn't have to be perfect. Now I'm just going through and I'm going to add my title. So you can see that I always have to spell it out for myself and then decide where the center is. So I have my February, and I've just created a little line, and I'm putting the UARY on the right side and the FEBR on the left. And then we are just going to fill all of that in with a very basic back stitch to finish. And I am using the green from the stem, the same green. I don't know why, it was just really speaking to me. February is not really a green time of year here in central Pennsylvania, even though it seems like it's been warming up. I think my crocuses come up a little earlier every year. Certainly this year they seem like they're up slightly early. I did have to wait for the ground to thaw a little bit and the snow to melt to dig that crocus out, because we had just gotten a big snowstorm the day before. That's what took out our power. But you know, usually still not up until a little bit later, but you know, such as the way things seem to be going. Anyway, I'm just using a very basic back stitch, and I'm filling in all of those letters one at a time, just very simply tracing over my pencil marks with my thread, like we did for January as well. For my Y, I kind of slightly angled my stitches there to make it have the smallest little curve, and I really like that detail. My E is not quite as tall as my F, and I also think that's kind of sweet, but you could really try to match it very closely if you wanted to, but that's the end of that. And then I'm going into my very ratty little needle book here and leftover threads, and I'm trying to find that same very light gray that we'd used in January to make a couple of snowflakes, because again, like I said, it has been snowing here. I'm not sure that every month I'm going to do a little seasonal marker, I don't know if it will make sense later in the year, but right now these little snowflakes are very easy to pop in and fill in a little extra space, and they look quite sweet. And again, I did have to dig this out of the snow. So I am using a couple of straight stitches as well as some fly stitches like we did last time to complete my little flakes. And I do a couple of small sections and a couple of little teeny weeny French knots as well, just to represent like little sleet pellets and ice. It's much icier here in February. My recommendation for the month is choose something unexpected to highlight, maybe like the bulb. A sketch is just a sketch. I tried to follow mine. I had to switch it out and pick out stitches. I had to change up what I was doing, and not everything worked out exactly as I thought it would, but I did try to stay on theme and enjoy my embroidery. And here we are. We've got January and February done. We have some sweet little snowflake details. I've captured a completely different element in my garden, like the bulb and the roots, which I think will be fun to periodically try to capture with some of my other floral elements as well. And we've got our January and February. We are going clockwise around, starting at the 6, and we have the first 2 wedges of our embroidery done. Thank you so much for joining me. Please make sure that you like and subscribe and stay notified so that you can join me. And thank you so much. Stay stitchy and enjoy your embroidery.